Hi, it's Margaret Meloni, and welcome to Season 3 of the Death Dhamma Podcast. I'm so glad you're here, and I'm so appreciative that you are part of my community. And yet, I seek not to be attached to the idea of the podcast or even to the idea of our community. And that's our topic this season: attachment, clinging, and aversion. What happens when we really want something? What happens when we really don't want something? And what does it do to our suffering and dissatisfaction? Let's dive in and find out a little bit more with today's episode. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here. And it's the first episode of Season 3 of the Death Dhamma Podcast. And today I'm going to share some thoughts with you about clinging and aversion and our practice and how all of this makes sense for us as we talk together about Death Dhamma. I invited some of our wise teachers from Season 1 to come back to the podcast and share their favorite stories or teachings about clinging and aversion. And one of them replied back to me, "Oh, so you are talking about the second noble truth?" Well, why, yes, I am. You know, the Buddha's first teaching was called the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, which means the turning of the wheel. This discourse was given to the 5 ascetics who were his former companions at the deer park in Isipatana, now called Sarnath, near Benares, India. Now, those 5 ascetics, he had been wandering with them, because you remember, the Buddha left home and wandered out to find enlightenment after encountering old age, sickness, and death, and encountering another monastic. And so he became discouraged because he realized that their way, which was very, very harsh and limiting, wasn't working. And so you know the story. He sat down under the Bodhi tree and he meditated, all right? And after that, he gave his first discourse or teaching. And he started this discourse, this turning of the wheel, by advising his 5 ascetics to give up 2 extremes: indulgence in sensual pleasures and the tormenting of the body. So basically self-indulgence and self-mortification. Now, they were more involved in self-mortification because they were denying themselves even the basics in terms of food. And he realized that that wasn't the way. And that's why you hear the term, right, the middle way or the middle path. So he advised against too much sensual pleasure because these pleasures were base, right? Too much worldliness and not helpful in spiritual development. And on the other hand, tormenting the body was painful and also unhelpful in spiritual development. And what he found in his meditation, what he learned under the Bodhi tree, the 4 noble truths, right? The truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, there's an end, and the way to its end. Everything in this world could have the potential to bring us suffering. Some people like to say discomfort or dis-ease. The cause of suffering is craving. The end of suffering is nirvana or nibbana, depending on whether you are speaking Pali or Sanskrit. I should reverse that. Sanskrit is nirvana and Pali is nibbana, to be more clear. Don't worry. And oh, by the way to the end of the suffering is, the Noble Eightfold Path. And don't worry, we will definitely visit the Noble Eightfold Path at some point during the season. But today and right now, we are all about the truth of suffering, and that craving is the root, where craving means wanting something or really trying to avoid something. Maybe you can remember the episode back in Season 2 called The Promise of Impermanence, and the story of Mary Carroll as she tries to negotiate with her body over being sick. She was clinging to the idea that she could control her illness, and of course, she had aversion to being sick. And that just made it worse. So you know this. You know the 4 noble truths. But do you know them intellectually Or do you know them in your heart? And if you could see me right now, I would be, when I first said that, I'd be like, do you know them? And I'm gesturing to my head. And then I'm putting my hand over my chest and saying, or do you know it in your heart, right? Because we might know something and be able to memorize it and recite it, but that's different than having a true wisdom, a true skillfulness, a true knowing of something. And so is the truth of suffering front and center in your life? This wasn't in the Buddha's first teachings because it was unimportant. He didn't start with some throwaway lesson just to see who was listening. He had a profound experience. He woke up and he saw the truth of our existence. And after some convincing, he decides to teach what he has learned. Now, let's fast forward. The Buddha teaches for about 40 years, and then he dies. Or what he really does is he obtains nirvana or nibbana. He's no longer subject to rebirth. Why? Because he's gained release from suffering. He doesn't cling. He doesn't experience aversion. And if you consider his body of teaching, the thousands of lessons he taught, the thousands of lessons his monks have taught, why? What was the reason? To show us how to live in a way that we could gain release from suffering. Instructions on how to live good lives and do no harm and act with compassion and develop equanimity. These are all, central to his teachings. And some very deep teachings on dependent origination and form and consciousness. Not so that you can sit on your cushion and develop psychic powers and levitate, so that you can transcend suffering. And while the basics, like the idea of the Four Noble Truths, might be easy to comprehend, that doesn't make it easy to carry out. So we don't want to discount an idea or a teaching just because it seems easy to comprehend. But again, remember, there's knowing, and then there's skillfully knowing with wisdom, right? I've always felt like the Buddha was such a skillful teacher, and he knew this was difficult. So he presented it to us using many similes and seeking to help us to understand so that then what we could do is engage in the practice. And every day, life gives us our practice. All we have to do is pay attention, to engage. Life comes along and says to us, oh, you thought you were going to have an easy commute today? No, you're not. Guess what? Your car's breaking down. Or, oh, you thought you were getting promoted today? Guess what? You're getting laid off. Or conversely, guess what? We are offering you a better position. And that is impermanence. And we had lots of good discussions around impermanence in season 2. And ultimately, it's, oh, you thought you would live forever? Or, oh, you thought this person would always be by your side? Nope. That's our recognition of death. And that is the ultimate impermanence. And with it come the biggest or most intense clinging or aversion that you might ever experience. Or for most of us, that's true. Me speaking because I am just a regular lay person sharing thoughts with you, not enlightened. And so, yes, intense clinging or aversion. They come right along with our friend, the Grim Reaper. As we acknowledge our attachment, as we come face to face with it, we sit with it, we greet it by name, and we come closer to our release from suffering. That's what it's all about, that acknowledging our attachment, sitting with it, greeting it, and helping to become closer to our release from suffering. So I hope you will join me in reclaiming peace by connecting with clinging and aversion. I would love to hear from you, your thoughts, your suggestions, your own stories about attachment. So follow this link, I'm going to read it to you in a minute here, to leave me a 90-second message with your ideas and suggestions. You can go to https://www.speakpipe.com/ .com/Death_Dhamma_podcast. I suppose you could also just use your favorite search engine to say SpeakPipe Death Dhamma Podcast. And there you can record an audio message for me. And be sure to come over to margaretmeloni.com. That's MargaretMeloni.com and join the community. You've been listening to the Death Dhamma Podcast with your host, Margaret Meloni. Thank you so much for being here. Come find me on margaretmeloni.com, MargaretMeloni.com. And until we meet again, may you be well, may you be happy, may you be at ease, and may you be free from suffering. Bye for now.